Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. So today we celebrate Bodhi Day, which on the calendar takes place on December 8th. And so we still have time to decorate your ficus plant, or what we call our Bodhi plant, or even your house with strings of colored lights. And some people also hang 3 shiny ornaments to represent the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. On Bodhi Day, we honor the day of enlightenment of the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, who was born a prince but left behind his life of ease and privilege in order to seek to understand the condition of being human, in particular to discern the cause of suffering and to alleviate it. After spending a long time seeking and embracing various spiritual practices, he decided to sit himself down beneath a Bodhi tree and meditate until he came to an understanding. He sat for 7 days, and then on the 8th day, still sitting beneath the tree, it all came to him and he was enlightened. He had complete comprehension. And the understandings that he came to became the foundation of Buddhism, the 4 Noble Truths of the human condition, and the 8-fold path to happiness. And after that, Siddhartha Gautama became known as the Enlightened One, the Buddha. And so we honor that day and that moment of enlightenment that occurred beneath the Bodhi tree, which we celebrate on December 8th, as Bodhi Day, a day to reflect upon his enlightenment as well as on Buddhism itself. And what better way to ponder it all than to hear a traditional Jataka tale? The Jataka tales are ancient Buddhist stories from India, and these stories were intended to show the virtues of the Buddha, as well as to illustrate behaviors and practices for Buddhists to aspire to. They were intended to inspire contemplation. And so in contemplation of Bodhi Day, or in celebration of it, we have a story to contemplate. One beautiful sunny day, a Buddhist monk went out for a walk, and having completely lost in his thoughts, he just happened to find himself wandering alongside a lovely little stream. And in the background of his thoughts, he heard the gentle flow of the water, and he felt the sun warming his body and the soft breeze on his face, and that all lulled him into a deep sense of serenity. But his daydreaming was suddenly interrupted when he became aware of a splashing and a struggling in the water. A scorpion had fallen into the stream and was in great difficulty, soon to drown, for scorpions cannot swim. The monk deeply felt the fear that the scorpion must have been experiencing, and so he immediately bent down and scooped him out of the water. He was just about to release him on the path when the scorpion stung him, which caused the monk to jerk his hand back in pain. And when he did so, the scorpion fell back into the water. Quickly, the monk reached back into the stream, caught the scorpion into his hand, and started to carry him once again to safety. But the scorpion stung again, causing another jolt of pain, which made the monk accidentally drop the scorpion back into the water. So the monk reached in again and he scooped up the scorpion, and again he was stung. And this scenario was replayed over and over and over. A little boy came upon the path and he saw all that was happening, and perplexed, he asked the monk why he kept trying to save the scorpion, knowing it would sting him every time. And before he could answer, the monk had an idea. He bent over and he picked up a very large leaf and he dipped it into the water, scooped up the scorpion, released the creature, who then scampered away. With a sigh of satisfaction, he turned to the boy to explain, "It is the scorpion's nature to sting, and it is my nature to save." Now, some of you know that I'm a storyteller and I'm always on the lookout for stories to tell. And so I've run into this story several times and I've never liked it because I like stories with happy endings where an understanding arises and change happens for the good, like Hallmark movies where everyone is good and it all ends well and people don't sting one another. Instead, they appreciate kindness and compassion, and they want to be kind and compassionate, and they graciously accept loving gestures and with gratitude. I don't like stories that end with a sting. So always at the end of the Jataka tale, there is an explanation or a moral. And in this story, the takeaway or the explanation is be true to your nature. Just as the monk's nature is to be loving and compassionate, the scorpion's nature is to sting. And we must not be judgmental of others and the way each person is in the world, for we each have our own nature. And if we take this tale at face value, we can rest with the reassurance that we are the monk, and it is our nature to be compassionate. But I think this story is actually quite complex. It has many layers. There's much more we can contemplate. And one layer that we can peel away today is to ask, am I the monk or am I the scorpion? Because I think we are both. Sometimes the monk and sometimes the scorpion. Even though I want to think I am always the monk and not the scorpion. Because we want to be compassionate and kind, but in this world that seems to become more cutting and sharp and unkind, we sometimes find ourselves doing the stinging, just like the scorpion, perhaps even stinging those that have reached out a loving hand. Or we sting in our private judgments, or our inner anger, or with our negative thoughts, or reacting maybe to someone in an offended manner. And why do we do that? So at each service, including today, we recite the Golden Chain. This was written by a woman named Dorothy Hunt. She wrote it in 1927. She was a Shin Buddhist living in Hawaii. And although we just listened to it, I'd like to recite it again. I am a link in Amita's golden chain of love that stretches around the world. I will keep my link bright and strong. May I be kind and gentle to every living thing and protect all who are weaker than myself. May I think pure and beautiful thoughts and say pure and beautiful words and do pure and beautiful deeds. May every link in Amita's golden chain of love be bright and strong, and may we all attain perfect peace. I love these words, and I'm inspired by them each time we say this gatha. I want to always be kind and gentle and think pure thoughts. I want to take the time to be helpful and kind. I want to attain perfect peace within. But I'm glad the words say, may I think pure and beautiful thoughts. May I be kind and gentle to every living being, because the word may acknowledges that I cannot do that through my own self-power, which is based only on my ego. As Shin Buddhists, we know we cannot rely on our own power, on our own efforts. We know that we are human and subject to our own ego, our self-centeredness, and our needs and our desires. We can rely only on other power, Buddha-centered power, and we receive that through the primal vow of the Amida Buddha, the vow to save all sentient beings. And when we trust in that, we know we are enveloped in great compassion. Shinran said, though I cannot see the light that enfolds me, my eyes being blinded by self-centered desires, the heart of true compassion constantly, endlessly illuminates and nurtures my body and mind. So when we trust in the great compassion of the Amida Buddha, the compassion that constantly nurtures body and mind, that compassion allows us to step outside ourselves and embrace, for one thing, the truth of interdependence, the truth that we are all connected. And we can respond to one another, to all of humanity, to the world and everything in it, by realizing that we share these very human ways of being compassionate 1 minute and stinging the next. When we understand that loss and suffering, joy and love are universal, we are reminded that we all share the experience of being human. When we truly understand and accept our interdependence, our connection to one another, then compassion arises, both for others and even for ourselves. Compassion even when we sting or are stung. I think Fyodor Dostoevsky must have been a Buddhist, for he recognized this when he said, "All is like an ocean. All flows and connects. Touch it one place and it echoes at the other end of the world." When we sting, it echoes around the world. And when we are compassionate, that too resounds around the globe. We know this intellectually, and we experience this on a daily basis, on a minute-by-minute basis. But going through this pandemic and the initial stages of the pandemic when we were in lockdown, that truly helped to drive home the point. And I want to use that recent example of the pandemic lockdown as a very tangible example of what is true every single day. Sometimes when I'm in a place where there are a lot of people, such as in a grocery store, I look around at everyone and I think, we have all been through the same thing. There's not one person there who has not been through that time of lockdown. We all went through it. That time of fear and the unknown and the scrambling we had to do to try to figure out how to be safe. People had different outcomes. People handled it differently, perhaps, but every single one of us has been through that incredibly profound experience. We went through it together. And now, being out and about in the world once again and doing relatively normal activities makes it a shocking thought to look back and recognize what it was like for every single one of us. And then when I have those thoughts, I'm amazed to realize how connected we are. That shared experience alone helps me to see how vulnerable each one of us is. And then I feel this bond and compassion for every single person in that grocery store. And then my thoughts go beyond not just the grocery store, but everyone in my neighborhood, in our city, state, country, everyone in the entire world. I think about those early days of lockdown when some people panicked and some were filled with fear and others tried very hard to make things normal. There were so many kinds of responses. Some were compassionate. And lots of times, forgetting our interconnectedness, the response may have been to sting. It is in our nature. Prince Shotoku, he lived from 574 to 622. He's considered the father of Buddhism in Japan because he brought the Buddha Dharma to Japan, and he saw Buddhism as a way for his people to understand their true nature. He said, "Let us cease from wrath and refrain from angry looks. Let us not be resentful when others differ from us. For all people have hearts, and each heart has its own leanings. Their right is our wrong, and our right is their wrong. We are not unquestionably sages, nor are they unquestionably fools. Both of us are simply ordinary persons. How can anybody lay down a rule by which to distinguish right from wrong? For we are all one with another, wise and foolish, like a ring that has no end." So this quote brings me back to the Jataka tale of the monk and the scorpion. It is our basic nature to be simple, ordinary persons, wise and foolish, to be compassionate and to sting. And this is the world in which we live. It is a hard world. It always has been. And we are fragile and trying our best. It is not easy to be human. But we can embrace the truth of interdependence. We can recognize our connection to one another. And we can trust in the great compassion of the Amida Buddha as expressed through the primal vow. We can envelop ourselves in that compassion, a compassion that is given to all. I'd like to close by reading you a poem. It's called Shoulders by Naomi Shihab Nye. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 3 times north and south, because his son is asleep on his shoulder. No car must splash him, no car drive too near to his shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. His ear fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. For the road will only be wide and the rain will never stop falling. Please join me again in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu.